Coming up on today's episode of PSN, Para snowboarder Sandrine Hemel joins the show talking about the para snowboard season and Big White, the last major competition of the season. Let's get started.
Welcome to Parasport Nation with Alex Smyth and Nathan Clement.
Welcome into the show. I'm Alex Smyth. As always, I'm joined by my co-host, Paralympian Nathan Clement, and now nominated for BC's Para Athlete of the Year. First off, Nathan, congratulations.
Thank you very much, Alex. It's a special honor to even be a finalist with this amazing group of athletes there. As well, Cody Fournier, who won multiple gold medals on the track in Paris, and Sebastian Masabi are in the male category, which is really, really incredible just to have those caliber of athletes. But also on the women's side, you have Danielle Ellis, friend of the program, Julia Haynes, and Maggie Manning, who have all gotten to know over the years. And it's just really amazing just to see the level of sport and the level of athletes in British Columbia.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, that is a stacked group. There are no weak links. Everyone is deserving of that award. It's going to be really interesting to see who comes away with the awards. When are they taking place?
The awards are taking place Thursday, March 6th in Vancouver.
Okay, so we'll definitely have to have a recap on the next episode of PSN. But beyond just the athletes nominated in those categories, there's a lot happening in the world of parasport with other deserving athletes. Take it away, Nathan, with the PSN update.
Now, the PSN update.
The bright side of the bay, Oakland, California, welcomed Canada's paraclimbers to the U.S. Paraclimbing National Championships. Friend of the program, Seamus Bullion captured a bronze in the AU3. Next up on the paraclimbing calendar is its first World Cup in May in the Beehive state of Utah. Switching to the curling rink, Canada's World Championship campaign got underway in Scotland. Nearly halfway through the round robin, Canada is 3-2 with wins over the US, Japan, and Latvia. In cross country, we cross the North Sea to Norway as the FIS Cross Country World Championships adds a series of para sprint races. To the slopes, Big White hosts a Para Snowboard World Championships in BC. Racing gets underway March 4th to 10th. Check into PSN to hear how Canada fared in all the disciplines. In wheelchair rugby, Mike Whitehead has announced his retirement after a 24-year career. Whitehead has worn the Maple Leaf at 6 Paralympics, where he's won 3 medals in Athens, Beijing, and London. And that's the PSN update.
So much to get to in that jam-packed PSN update, Nathan, but obviously you left the biggest news for last. Mike Whitehead retiring from wheelchair rugby, I should say. Such a tremendous athlete, such a tremendous ambassador for the sport. As you mentioned, 24-year career. That is truly remarkable. I've had the privilege of interviewing him in the past. I mean, such a storied career. Like, what more can you say about Mike Whitehead when it comes to wheelchair rugby? I nearly did again. Wheelchair rugby.
Mike Whitehead is one of those guys where I've gotten to know him over the years and really seen what him and that core group with wheelchair rugby really did in the early 2000s, really helping that sport explode and really take off and lead to so much success on the court, winning those medals in Athens, Beijing, and London. But the Mike Whitehead I've really gotten to know is the advocate, is the leader, is what he's done in sport governance, working with the Canadian Paralympic Committee on the Athletes Council and everything he's done in and outside of that, and just been an incredible ambassador for wheelchair rugby, but also parasport as a whole, as he's one of the shining beacons of what's possible and what can be displayed, as he's just pure class, just a complete gentleman and great man.
Yeah, and you hope that his efforts, his work carries on. Maybe not as a member of the team per se. Maybe there's some other avenues that his passion can carry on and continue to have an impact and grow that legacy of wheelchair rugby in the world of parasport. But you also mentioned in the PSN update, Big White is just around the corner. Well, it was fitting to bring on a para snowboarder to talk about the competition, but also find out a bit more about how they've been doing in the lead up to Milano Cortina just a year away. So let's welcome Ian, para snowboarder Sandrine Hemel, for an interview. Sandrine, thank you so much for taking time to chat with us today.
Thank you for having me, guys. Happy to be here.
Well, we're happy to have you. So you've had a pretty solid season so far, including a podium finish with the Europa Cup. How would you say your year is going so far?
Yeah, overall, I think it's been a good year. Last year, I missed most of the season because I had surgery. So it's good to get back into it. I'm happy with that resolve, hoping to build off of that resolve and be able to get a podium too on the World Cup tour. But I think it was a fairly good start. Yeah.
As Alex mentioned, you were on the podium this season. Now we're reaching 1 year out of the games in 2026. How important is getting that momentum with 1 year to go till Milano Cortina?
I think just for me to be on the course itself, it's not just the result. Obviously, we want them, but I think to be more and more, since I've missed so much, to be able to be on a track, a World Cup track, I think that's what it's going to be important for me before the games, especially because it's not like we can find SBX track everywhere or at bank slalom. Like when we have one accessible, usually like we try to use it as much as we can. So I think just this week too is going to be huge since we're doing both to get that time on track for Milan.
Are there lessons that you can draw from your experience in both Pyeongchang and then in Beijing, being at the games, that you can then bring forward as you prepare for Milan?
Yeah, I think for me they were very different. Obviously, the first one, it's your first game, so you kind of get used to the environment of the games. You know, we can train as much as we can, but there's nothing that you can do in training to simulate what it's going to be at the games. And Beijing, the last one, was different because at the time I think I was more aiming for a medal, where the first one obviously wanted to win, but like I don't think I was there yet, so it was more a learning experience. So the third games, maybe my last, I think again the goal obviously is going to be to get a medal this time, and it's going to be fun to see my teammates who is going to be their first games to experience that with them too.
You mentioned access to facilities for bank slalom and snowboard cross, but what kind of does a season look like as a para snowboarder throughout the year when maybe you don't have access to that facilities, but also in like the everyday in season, but also in the off season?
So usually until October, we mostly do free riding, so we're not on a track. We either go to South America or Europe. It's getting a little harder to find snow. And then our competition season goes from end of October until March. Usually Big White is our last race. And then from then, I train at the National Sports Institute in Montreal. It's where the Olympic Stadium is. And that's where we do all of our strength conditioning there until we start again, usually end of August. That's when we're back on snow.
Well, and you mentioned Big White, so obviously it's just around the corner. You've also mentioned in the past it's your favorite place to snowboard. What is it about that course that really appeals to you, and how are you feeling as you prepare for Big White?
Yeah, today was our first training day at Big White. And I think what's really exciting, especially for this event this year, is that we're also doing big slalom. It's been quite a few years that usually we would only do SBX. So that's kind of exciting that we're going to be racing on two different tracks. And also they built it a little bit differently. It's bigger. The bank slalom's got 24 turns, which is huge. It's a huge track. So I think that's one of the most exciting things. And it's also the second time that I compete at Big White for a world championship. Our first world championship were at Big White in 2017. So it's exciting to be back.
How does preparation and racing differentiate between the bank slalom and the snowboard cross?
Well, I find it a little bit easier to focus on bank slalom because you're by yourself on the track. when you do snowboard cross, there are 3 other girls. So yes, you're obviously focused on what you're doing, but you have to pay attention to what's going on around you. So I think to me that's the biggest difference is how I focus differently. And obviously the goal being bank slalom, it's the time trial, and SBX, even if it takes you 4 minutes, if you're the first one to cross the finish line, you still win. So it's kind of a different, like, you don't, bank slalom, I'm hunting for time, where in this case, I'm like, it's more strategically paying attention to others and obviously what I'm doing.
Is there a race that you prefer out of those two? I personally, snowboard cross is easily my favorite winter para sport. It may be my favorite para sport of all time. Like when it was introduced, I just immediately fell in love. But what about you? Do you prefer the bank slalom? Do you prefer snowboard cross? Or is it hard to kind of choose between the two?
I would say bank slalom because I'm a smaller rider. Sometimes I have maybe more of it's a little bit easier for me, where SBX, if it's a long, fairly flat track, since I'm small, then I really have to have a perfect run. But there's nothing that like the adrenaline rush you get off of SBX is quite hard to get into anything else. Because obviously, like, you're going fast, but sometimes it's so chaotic that, like, you're just glad to be alive when you cross the finish line. So yeah, I think I'll still pick bank slalom.
I come from a sport in paracycling where we have time trials and road races. So it's very much that thing where a time trial is just you and yourself. But as soon as you get into that road race, it's just everyone fighting for corners, everyone fighting for positions. And it's so adrenaline focused that you're just flying on a high the whole time, just trying to think of everything. But what I find so impressive about the sport, and even what Snowboard Canada's done, is having events in Mount Sema, but also in Big White over the years, is just having that home country advantage. What does it mean to race in Kelowna? What does it mean to race in Canada at a World Championships?
I think the big difference is, well, for example, we know the staff, so it's like a very familiar environment, especially that in my case, I've been coming to Big White for 8-9 years in a row. So it feels very familiar. Obviously, representing your country on home soil too, there's pride, and you want to do it well, especially when you compete at home. Yeah, I'd say that's the biggest thing for me. Competitive in general, but when you're competing on home soil, it's like you really want to make sure you do good.
You had mentioned too that there's the differences in like how the courses are when you are competing snowboard cross versus bank slalom. For someone who doesn't know, can you like kind of take us through how those courses or how those runs would differentiate from one another beyond just, racing by yourself or racing against 3 other competitors at the same time?
Yeah, I think the easiest way I found to describe SBX or snowcross is kind of like dirt bike race, or they do the same with BMX, or they do the same just horses, where there's a gate and the gate drops and it's the first one to cross the finish line. I think this is the easiest way to describe it. And bank slalom, I'd say it's like you're going around flags, but the snowbank is angled. I think it's the best way to visualize it, especially bank slalom, because it's not as, you don't see it really on TV. It's quite rare that you see it, where SBX, it's a little bit more mainstream. So I think for skiers, I'd say it's like running gates, but with snowbanks.
Outside of Big White, do you have any favorite locations that you get to go to throughout the calendar or throughout the season?
Ooh, good question. Yukon is really one of my fave too. Outside of Canada, maybe I would say we often go to Finland. Every year they organize the SBX race there. And I think what I really like about it is that because it's one of the biggest track that we have, it's usually one of the tracks where I'm most scared. But at the same time, when I cross the finish line, that like I'm really proud of myself for doing it. So I think in a way it is my favorite because of how it makes me feel once I'm done.
Does that like kind of sense of a light bit of fear, whether and as you mentioned, going down some different tracks and stuff, that you get that you talked even on that first Paralympic Games, you had this. Does it help you feel like, okay, I'm fully prepared for this competition? I'm getting a bit of the sense of the fear, but I have that because I'm in my element. I know where I am. I know what's at stake. Or is that a bit like kind of? Do you think it can distract you when you're in the race?
I think I'd say most of the time it helps because, especially in SBX, the best way to describe it would be if I do feel nervous or a little anxious, scared, I think I go faster because it's almost like I want to get out of there as fast as I can. It's weird to describe it that way, but it's almost like handsy to go. You're, yeah, that I think that would be the best way to describe it. So I think my fastest run were probably the ones where I was the most scared. It keeps you on your toes, really. And at the games, it's especially at the games because it can't feel like maybe a little bigger. I think it's good to have that fear and adrenaline going on. So when you get going, I find it almost that it's easier for me to get that tunnel vision. Yeah, that's the best way I could describe it.
Now, for yourself, is there anywhere you haven't boarded yet that's going to be a dream location for you to go to?
We haven't spent much time in Asia in general. So I think Japan would be a really cool location to go because it's known for the snow, skiing, snowboarding. So I think it'd be Japan. Hopefully you'll get to race there too. The Japanese team is quite big, so we're always asking them to organize an event, so we have an excuse to go. So yeah, I'll pick Japan.
As you mentioned, it is kind of towards the end of the season. Big White's kind of like that last major competition. You're on the ground there. How are the conditions? Is the snow kind of looking and feeling good for the races? Are there any concerns about the weather kind of cooperating or maybe not cooperating during the competition?
I think what's going to be tricky, it's kind of like that every year though at Big White, is that it's still cold in the morning, but it's really warm in the afternoon. So you get the surface change quite like a lot during the day. It's really firm in the morning, super soft in the afternoon. So you do have to adjust your riding because in the morning you're going to have more grip because it's so firm. In the afternoon, you don't have any because it's very slushy. So I think you definitely have to keep that in mind. Run to run, it can change. So generally, riders that can make that adjustment are the ones that are the most successful here at Big White.
We've spoken to other snow sport athletes in cross country and alpine skiing, but for yourself, is there a type of snow or that kind of like grippiness that you would prefer to race on or compete on?
I think the best snow is usually 2 or 3 days after a big snowfall if it's cold, and it needs to be cold the whole time after. That's when you won't have ice and also won't get slushy. So it's very specific, but I've been thinking about that recently and I think that's ideal. After that, maybe more on the softer side. Because when it's icy, it kind of hurts when you crash. So I think I prefer when you get a little more cushion.
And lastly, Sandrine, one thing I want to find out from you. Not only have you been able to reach the podium, but also your teammates have done quite well this year. What does it mean for you to see the team as a whole find success on the world stage, on the international stage, and how is the rest of the team feeling as we count down to Milano Cortina in a year out?
Yeah, I think everybody's super excited. Obviously, we have the more veteran rider, Alex and Tyler, that had been a lot of success on the World Cup. But I think another thing that is super exciting for our team is that we also have new riders, Chase and Phil, that are also have so much talent and potential. It's going to be potentially their first game. So we have a really nice balance of experienced riders with new riders. And I think it's nice because we can learn from each other. More experienced riders can give advice to the younger ones, and it's fun to almost experience new things through their perspective. It's almost like you get to relive them again. So I think leading up to the games, we have the perfect team to make sure that everybody's going to be ready.
Well, we're excited to follow along as the clock ticks down, and even as a Big White gets underway, and hopefully you make down those runs as quick as possible, so the fear and anxiety set aside for you. But thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks, guys. That was awesome. Thanks for having me.
That was para snowboarder Sandrine Hemel representing Canada on the national team as she prepares for Big White in the coming days. So much to get to in that conversation. But obviously, I want to start with one of the last questions, all about snow. I love just the responses we get from athletes, Nathan, when they describe the snow conditions, what they look for in snow, what really sets apart a good kind of track and race to one that's going to be a bit more of a challenge, and how finally they think about it and process it and identify, oh, this is the perfect conditions 3 days after a snowstorm, no ice, cold conditions. I love that.
Oh, it's just amazing, just really getting inside the athlete's head, because everyone has a certain preference. When we've asked Mark Arenz in the past and now Sandrine Hemel, it's always so unique just hearing how they break it down and how compact it is. Even reminds me of speaking with swimmers too, and really breaking down different pools we raced at and competitions we had where we want different temperatures, or we want a different feeling of the water when we go in there and compete. And it's just those fun little nuances of sport that really helps an athlete define who they are and really chase what they want to go after. And it's so unique, but also just hearing Sandrine talk about the mix that this team has, whether it's the veterans, but also those up and coming athletes, and just how crucial it is to have that team cohesiveness, especially in a sport like snowboard cross and bank slalom, where in the bank slalom, it's a time trial, but then in the cross country and in the snowboard cross, it is just all out, you versus the competitors there, but how everyone rises and comes together. And you're a big fan, and we've talked about snowboard cross in the past and just how those races break down, and just maybe give the viewers and listeners, like, what is that actually like to be 4 people lining up and just going down a hill in snowboard cross?
It's like bumper cars on the side of a snow hill. It's fantastic. I will fight anyone over the fact that I believe snowboard cross is the best winter para sport there is. I loved it from the moment it was introduced as a sport and as a para sport, because it's truly, as she mentioned in the interview, it doesn't matter how long it takes you to get down that hill. If you're the first one to cross the finish line, when it's all said and done, you're the winner. And oftentimes you see different races because you have technical aspects, like you have jumps, you have hills, you've got peaks and dips and valleys, but then you have sharp turns. And meanwhile, you've got 3 other competitors all trying to hit those turns at the same time, break away, create an opening for themselves. But sometimes they lose balance. Sometimes they get bumped into by one of the other racers. Sometimes you go up in the air, you mistime it, you lose some kind of momentum coming down off a jump, and you got to make up that time. I've seen races end when someone falls right at the beginning in the first or second turn. And you know what? They get up, they try to work their way back, and they end up winning the race as a result. Phenomenally entertaining, it's enticing, it's intense, it's gritty with the competition. There is truly nothing better than snowboard cross. For yourself though, Nathan, I was really struck by how Sandrine was talking about, the different types of races, and you picked up on this. The similarities almost to paracycling that you've experienced, the time trials to the road races. Like, it's interesting. These sports are very different, but they seem to share a lot of similarities.
Yeah, like that's a great thing with our sports, is there's some really close similarities just with how you have to take on different performances, different races. As she was talking about in the bank slalom, it's just you, the gates, the corners, and just trying to get down that course as fast as you can. And then, as you just said with snowboard cross, it is all out. There's so many things that can happen in an instance. And even like midway through the interview, I really saw that comparison and really felt that comparison because, as you mentioned, all it takes is a bump. Same thing in a road race. Like you could get hit, you could get thrown out of position, fighting for a corner, fighting for a position, and that could be the end of your race right there. But with snowboard cross and Tyler Turner had a great video that came out a few weeks ago where he kind of broke down a race that he did where even though he had some mistakes early on, he was able to find a way to keep pushing forward, find a way to really get that advantage on other athletes. And it's a game of, and especially in paracycling, and I could imagine in para snowboard too, is you know what your strengths are with your condition, but you also know what the other riders, the other people you're going up against, strengths are and weaknesses are. So it's almost a game of gamesmanship in a way too, trying to figure out where can I get this advantage on so and so, or how can I find a way that I can get into the lead. Maybe it's not right off the gun, maybe it's not right off the start, but later on in the race when you really have everything just so well detailed and well just put down there. But what I find so impressive, and I know we talk a lot about it when it comes to the snow sports, is their season and then the off season after that, because with a lot of times in the year, and we've seen it throughout the year with various different sports, is especially now as the years keep passing on and on, there's a lot more issues with snow now. So it really becomes a breakdown of how do you maximize that time in the off season. And just for her, even what she mentioned and is talking about how the Montreal INS, the sports center there, is now back. That is a huge advantage for Canada's athletes. Summer and winter, just having that facility back. And there's a lot of things that go on there, but just like the amount of time, dedication, and work that needs to be done in that off season is always so impressive to me.
Yeah, and one last point too, I want to get your thoughts on this because Sandrine mentioned that when you're competing on home soil, yeah, you know the course as well, you know the kind of the region, you got that like kind of home support, but she also mentioned you have that familiarity with the staff and the locals there. Like, do you find that to be a bit of an advantage when you are doing any races or competitions in Canada?
I was actually thinking about this a few days ago. It's amazing the advantage you get with staff when you have a competition on home soil, just because you can have more staff there, because as many sports know that isn't in the Big Four, Big Five leagues, is just the cost of staff to attend these competitions and attend training camps can be very difficult. But when it's at home, usually that cost is taken down a lot. So you're able to get a lot more staff, a lot more people present that can be that advantage, whether it's more strength and conditioning coaches or it's recovery, is that sports science team can make a huge advantage, and it just makes you feel more familiar because the staff's excited to be there. You're excited to have them there, and it's seeing people you probably haven't seen in months in an environment like that where everyone just feels so close and so tight, and it's just that familiarity, as we mentioned, but it's really feeling like a giant family. But also when you're at those kinds of competitions and they see that maple leaf, they see that Canada gear, it just raises yourself because you're having conversations, talking about your hometown, talking about what it means to be no matter where you are, and it's just a very, very special thing to have that added staff, but also having that Canadian flag flying at every park or everywhere you go to. It just means the world.
Yeah, well, it can lead to a tight group traveling with you, but we are tight up against the clock, so that is it for today's episode. Thank you for watching and listening. Be sure to check us out on YouTube, on AMI Audio, and wherever you get your podcasts.
Thanks for tuning in to Parasport Nation. Like and subscribe to the channel to follow us now.